Hello everyone, today I wanted to do a quick overview and guide to the fighter in Dark and Darker. We are now in early access and there's been a few changes, but the fighter is still a fantastic class. So I wanted to talk about how you might want to build out your fighter, different ways you can play them, and why I still think the fighter is one of the strongest classes in the game. So right away, the fighter is sort of the default 15s across the board class. It is the jack of all trades when it comes to melee and frontlining. It can do it all in terms of weapons. And one of the iconic features and perks, I think, for the fighter is specifically that weapon mastery perk. This lets you use any weapon you find in the dungeon, whether it is melee or ranged, and you can take advantage of all of the juicy and powerful gear and just put it on right away, which to me makes the fighter one of my favorite solo and zero to hero classes. If nobody else is on and I just want to play something, I can go on my fighter, dive into the goblin caves, dive into the ruins, whatever it is, have a good time, find something fun, pick it up, and just kind of snowball from there. So it's really useful for that. It should be noted that as you get more gear and as you have more money to buy things, you can easily drop weapon mastery, because even without weapon mastery, fighters are masters of melee and have decent ranged options with the crossbow, as well as being able to use a lot of the throwing weapons in the game. So you could just have some Franciscas and things as well. And that is a fantastic way to deal with those pesky wizards that are going to ruin your fun. So as an overall general character, fighters are in that situation where they typically don't have any horrible matchups. As long as you have your longbow with you or a nice crossbow, you can deal with most encounters just by playing around how your opponents are playing. In terms of the other perks, this is what I'm currently running, but there are options in terms of what you want to do here. So I have Swift and defense mastery, because I'm wearing a decent amount of heavy armor. This is going to reduce that penalty, as well as give me just a little bit more bang for buck. And the better your armor is, obviously, the better defense mastery gets. And then I'm running counterattack right now because I am using a longsword, and I find with counterattack it does let you get those riposts off when you parry. So sometimes if you parry and you're kind of max ranging, getting that riposte swing is going to be really hard if they just, hold S away from you as you block their attack. But having counterattack sometimes is the difference between actually getting in, both by attacking faster and by moving a little bit faster. So I find with the longsword, this is a really helpful thing to have. Obviously, if you're sword and boarding, this can be totally fine as well. Now, in terms of some of the other perks that you can run, I think there's some set combinations and then a few that maybe are more situational. So let's talk about some combos. So obviously dual wield and Slayer make a fantastic combination. Really, if you're going for a fighter using two melee weapons, this is a great combo. But as a result, because Slayer makes it so you cannot wear heavy armor, you are going to be a little bit faster. And I find that this dual wield Slayer combo is great for, like, if you're low level, you maybe don't have a ton of gear, you're level 5, you've extracted maybe a couple times, you just want to grab like whatever your preferred main hand weapon is, and then you just throw like an offhand like Castellan or whatever in your offhand, and effectively it's just saying, +5 damage, plus 15% attack speed, and away you go. You also have a few more weapon combos you can use in terms of combo attacking, but in PvE, you'll probably just be poking in with that main hand, and that +5 damage and that plus 15% attack speed goes a very, very long way, especially at low gear levels. It can be the difference between, being able to kill a skeleton in 3 or 4 hits versus 5 or 6, which really feels good in terms of just clearing PvE quickly. And then obviously against players, just knocking them out in a couple hits feels really strong. And that +5 damage contributes quite a bit to that. Combo attack is obviously very good with the dual wield, because the faster you're attacking, you're getting this attack power buff, and you're getting lots of frequent attacks over and over. So that feels great. If you're using like a really slow two-hander, sometimes you're doing more poking, and this might not trigger as often, but I still also do like power or combo attack, and I will sometimes slot that in, especially if I'm not going to be running weapon mastery. Like if I had a crossbow instead of my longbow, easily slot combo attack in because it's fantastic there. Now, in terms of some things that got nerfed, Barricade recently was changed to give you flat armor. 50 armor is quite a bit, but this is only active when you're actively blocking. So this can be useful if you're, pushing towards a archer or like a ranger and they have their triple shot up and you want that extra armor. They're probably going to be kneecapping you if you're holding your shield up walking towards them. But this can help mitigate the damage. And obviously, if you're wearing plate and you have Barricade and you're holding a shield and you're jump crouching as you're approaching, you can actually really reduce how much damage you're taking from an archer and really force their hand and force their position. Obviously, just watch for traps because you're probably not going to see too much as you're walking forward. Shield mastery also helps that playstyle if you're sort of the one like chasing down archers frequently. I find especially on the new duo ruins map, you find a lot of rangers, so there could be an argument to be made for having like a barricade shield mastery combo as well as taking projectile resistance and really just building out your character to be able to force the issue when it comes to rangers. So this is a nice combination as well. And then something like Swift potentially to further increase your move speed, because that's going to be your biggest weakness, is just being in all that plate. You're really going to be slowed down. And then finally, you do have Adrenaline Spike, which I find I don't get enough value out of typically to run it frequently. So I don't love it. And yeah, so those are the perks and some combos you can think about. So obviously Swift and Defense Mastery kind of make a make sense combo. Projectile resistance is something like always just, it is good, especially if you're facing a lot of rangers and projectiles. It also works against spells that are projectiles, which can sometimes be a pain for a fighter to deal with. So there are a few spells like your magic missiles, your fireballs, and ice bolts are considered projectiles, so it will help you a little bit against that. And then the dual wield Slayer and combo attack perk, kind of like these all are a very offensive kind of dual wield skirmisher build if you want to play that style. Now, in terms of your actual skills, you have a few things you can play around with, but typically I really only like Second Wind, Sprint, Taunt, and Victory Strike. Those are kind of my preferred skills. The other ones, I find they're too narrow or have too much of a specific playstyle. Adrenaline Rush, that 25% attack speed, it's for 8 seconds, but then you get this penalty at the end. It can be a little bit of a debuff that can kind of cost you a fight sometimes. Obviously 25% attack speed is great, and comboed with Second Wind you can get rid of the penalty, but I find you're really just like saving this for that perfect situation to combo with your Second Wind, and it's not it for me for the most part. Breakthrough is also, once again, just sort of too situational. You can remove some debuffs that slow movement speed, but I find like I rather just have Sprint, which just increases my movement speed by a whole bunch, and I find that there aren't too many long duration slows, and maybe it's just because I'm old and my reaction time is slow that I'm not getting enough benefit by the time I'm slowed and I'm popping this. It's not it as well for me. These two both require shields, or I guess technically this works with a longsword, but I also don't love these two, and I think the bottom 4 here have a lot of utility, so we'll talk about that. So obviously Second Wind, that 50% heal over 12 seconds is a lot of value, whether you are going in with no gear, low gear, you're brand new. Just being able to recover can help you just stay alive a little bit longer, recover from mistakes, and essentially just like tops you up after a good PvP encounter, or keeps you alive during a PvE encounter that sort of got out of hand, whether you pulled a Wraith and a Skeletal Champion at the same time or something, and you're just taking more hits than you meant to, or you're still learning attack patterns and things like that, and it can just help you recover from mistakes or just little things that happen in the course of battling PvE. And then obviously in PvP, it really shines, giving you that 50% effective HP as long as you're, using it early enough that it's actually going to save you, because the last thing you want to do is try to save it till you're below half health and then pop it, and then you realize you're getting hit and you're dead, and if you only had your Second Wind heal you for like 15% of your HP and you've already died. So this gets some getting used to. I tend to be very conservative with this, and you know that's the kind of mistake that I would probably tend to make rather than popping it really early. There are ways to get second wind back, specifically just resting at a campfire. So that is a thing to consider in terms of evaluating second wind, but it is good. It obviously gives you that 50% extra HP, and it scales with your HP. So as you get more strength and more plus HP on your gear, it's going to heal more, which is fantastic. Sprint is also just a very great spell. It has or skill rather, it has a low cooldown, 6 seconds, feels like a decent amount of time, lets you close the gap. I like to get as close as I can and like be almost on top of my enemy and then pop sprint so that I can get those follow-up melee attacks, especially if they're trying to run away. Or, you know, if you're seeing somebody closing the distance and you're trying to escape, sometimes popping sprint and just making distance can be a great thing to do as well. Depends on the encounter and the module you're in. Obviously, all these things are taken into account. So sprint is just a great all-rounder, and like I said, the cooldown is short enough that you get to use this quite a bit in the dungeon. Taunt is really interesting. This has been nerfed. It used to be more physical damage reduction, but it still is 10% physical damage reduction for 8 seconds, and this is like a flat 10%, so I'd go from, you know, 22 here or 21.8 to 31.8. Which is a nice reduction in damage. Obviously, the more physical damage reduction you have, the better this feels. So let's say you are in a decent set of gear and you have 50% physical damage reduction. Going from 50 to 60% physical damage reduction is actually reducing the amount of damage you're taking by 20%. Because you're, instead of taking, you know, 50 damage on a hit that would do 100, you're now only taking 40 damage, right? So that is a really nice reduction there. So adding that flat physical damage reduction, just it feels better. The more physical damage you have, like the better this feels. And it even has utility. Obviously, the first 3 lines of this, increasing the aggro value to all monsters. Or the first 2 lines rather. This some utility there, especially for bossing. When it comes to the Lich and things like that, you may want to position or have enemies target you, and you can kind of grind them down while you have your other characters for sort of focusing damage on the boss. And just in all sorts of encounters and modules, it can be helpful to play around with the AI and the aggro just to make things a little bit more predictable and just cleaner. So there's utility there as well. And then for Victory Strike, I do really like this. The 20% extra damage is really fun. So you only get the heal if you land the killing blow with Victory Strike. So it's better to think of this less of a way to heal and more of a way to sort of do additional damage. It's almost like, think of this more how you would use something like a Blow of Corruption on the Warlock, in terms of just like you're using this as a damage steroid. And 20% damage is actually significant, especially when you're using a big 2-hander, and especially if you're using something like a crossbow. So this is probably my favorite combo, is if I'm using a really nice crossbow, because first of all, when it comes to things like Death Skulls, having that crossbow just to knock them out of the sky is great, and this can just give you that like guaranteed one shot that's going to heal you 5% of your HP, so it can kind of help you keep topped up, which is fine. But 20% extra damage when you're using, you know, a blue crossbow, this is getting into the zone where if you just headshot a wizard, they're dead. So this is a really fun combo with that. But the heal is maybe sort of misleading sometimes. You think about this and you're like, oh, it's going to be so much, but I would say compared to something like second wind, Victory Strike is probably not going to give you anywhere near 50% of your HP recovered. And obviously in an encounter, the 20% extra damage is going to be really useful, but it's going to be more offensive because the chance of you finishing off an enemy and recovering 5% HP and having that HP be meaningful in terms of determining whether you survive like the rest of the encounter is going to be pretty low. So definitely Victory Strike is a great offensive tool, but it's not necessarily going to replace second wind in certain scenarios. And I do find it's really hard to give up sprint, but I would, depending on my team composition, potentially consider Victory Strike over second wind, just being more offensive. And that's another option as well. But I do find it very hard to play without sprint. Maybe if you have a bard on your team that can give you accelerando, and that sort of feels the same, but they do stack, right? So having sprint and accelerando going feels very fun. And yeah, I think though these bottom 4 skills you can play around with depending on your team composition and what your goals are and what your playstyle is, and obviously your budget as well, because the more potions you have and the more healing you have access to, maybe you don't necessarily want second wind to top you up, but even then, like that 50% HP in a fight is very good. It's a very quick heal, and this can easily be the difference between life or death in a PvP encounter, even if it is only for one fight. But surviving that one extra fight in the dungeon is often all you need to do to guarantee a successful run. So this is why sprint and second wind are the most powerful and common skills you see on fighters. But I do want to just suggest play around with these two, because they are fun, and they also have situations where they're good. But these get better the better gear you have as well. So yeah, that is generally the fighter. We could talk a little bit about the equipment and a few notes and things. And with that, we'll go to the merchants and we'll talk about this. So in terms of the weaponsmith, the nice thing when you have that weapon master perk, you can just look at everything and think about like, ooh, how do I want to use this? So you can just hunt for blues, hunt for well-statted greens, and think about using them in your build. And it's really easy once you have a little bit of money to kind of stay equipped and topped up as a fighter and just dive back in the dungeon. And if you're running Slayer, obviously you can do things like, yeah, just grab that Castellan dagger for 6 gold. And even if you're going to use your default kit, you can just drop your shield, put this back on, and get in the dungeon. You're getting +5 damage just with this. So even your default arming sword is going to feel really, really strong, and you're going to be really fast compared to a heavy armored fighter. And that can be the difference between sort of, life and death in many, many encounters. And even against PvEs, sometimes the move speed feels a lot better than going into the heavy armor, because let's talk about this heavy armor. The nice thing is the armor smith generally always has one sort of reasonably priced plate piece, so you can get like a nice chest plate. I like the Templar armor because it gives you some magic resist, decent armor rating, and the movement penalty doesn't feel too bad. It's only -20 compared to -35 here, and you'll notice the Fine Curious here also has -10 magic resist, so that's like 30 magic resist difference. Obviously, you're not getting the projectile reduction that the Templar, like on the Templar armor, so this is kind of what you're paying for, and you are getting a little bit more armor here as well. This is a white versus a gray, so the numbers are a little bit off here, but it should also really be noted that if you're wearing gray plate, the movement speed penalty is the same as if you're wearing purple gear. So really, you're kind of already paying the heavy armor tax when you're wearing the gray stuff without anywhere near the level of physical damage reduction. So that is something to consider, that at lower gear levels, something like running the Slayer build that doesn't necessarily rely on the heavy armor, it's going to be a little bit more effective, because you're getting these huge flat bonuses, like +5 flat damage and 15% attack speed is a significant bonus. And then you're having the ability to sort of take off your crappy armor and then really just wear ideally something like a Regal Gambeson and like some loose trousers, really low move speed penalty, get that extra agility. And yeah, you'll be a lot squishier than a typical fighter, but you're going to have so much damage that you can often just kill people before they can really do anything about it. If you are doing that Slayer build, obviously the leather cap is sort of like your top tier of armor, and this is something that all classes can wear, and kind of it's true for a lot of classes that this is sort of the best you can get. And for 6 gold, even that 7% headshot damage reduction is a big deal, and it's gonna make it so those scary longbows in the dungeon aren't just taking you out. But this is one of the advantages of going for something that's a little bit better. And really the visored Barbuda helmet is mostly for the drip. There are better helmets, but this one just like looks the coolest, so that's why I like it. And yeah, the fighter is just this class with a ton of flexibility. It has so many fun ways to play. I definitely recommend giving it a try, especially if you're new to the game, because this is a great way to try out literally every and any weapon you find in the dungeon and find one that works well for you. And then from there, you can go on and really learn the ins and outs of the melee combat and the ranged combat, learn how arrows and archers work, and learn the drop on the bows and sort of different sniping spots and positions, and kind of go from there. So yeah, thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful. It is definitely designed for sort of newer players or players that just, you know, looking to hear more people's thoughts on other classes in the dungeon. I still think, despite some of the physical armor changes, the way they've reduced and they've capped physical armor, added armor penetration to crossbows and some of the maces, I still think fighter is a fantastic class. I still think it is worth it to go for a high armor build, using sort of like a sword and board, despite the fact that they've nerfed the base damage on the Falchion a little bit. Yeah, I think fighters are still in a fantastic spot. One of the best classes to sort of frontline your group. And yeah, they will continue to be sort of iconic melee masters in Dark and Darker. So yeah, once again, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.